Nora Whitaker dropped to her knees in the dirt and pressed her father's trembling hands between hers. He couldn't look at her, couldn't say the words, but the telegram crumpled on the floor said enough. They wanted to send her, the poorest girl in the territory, to the wealthiest rancher in Wyoming. Not as a bride, as a joke. Her sister Margaret had made sure of that. But Nora didn't cry. She stood up, wiped the dust from her skirt, and said 5 words that changed everything. "I'll go, but I won't beg." If you want to hear what happened next, subscribe to our channel, stay with Nora's story until the very end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We'd love to see just how far her story has traveled. The morning heat had already turned brutal when Nora pulled her hand from her father's grip. Henry Whitaker sat on the edge of a chair that had lost one leg 3 winters ago. He'd propped it against the wall so it wouldn't tip. That was how they lived, propped up, leaning on whatever held. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I know." "Then don't." Nora folded the telegram and tucked it into her apron pocket. Her fingers were steady, her voice wasn't. "Pa, we owe $14 to the general store. The roof leaks in 3 places. You can't lift your right arm above your shoulder since the accident, and the only work anyone offers you is pity work. Half pay, half respect." Henry flinched, not because she was wrong, because she was right. "So I'll go," Nora said. "I'll meet this man, and if he's decent, I'll stay. If he's not, I'll walk back. Either way, I'm not sitting here waiting for this cabin to fall on us." Henry looked at his daughter, 24 years old, thin from seasons of not enough, hands rough from scrubbing other people's floors. She had her mother's jaw, set, unbreakable. "Margaret arranged this," he said quietly. "You know that." "I know exactly what Margaret arranged. She wants you shamed, Nora. She wants you sent back crying so she can tell the whole territory that even a desperate rancher wouldn't take a Whitaker." Nora tied her hair back with a strip of cotton torn from a flour sack. "Then she'll be disappointed." The ride to Mercer Ranch took 6 hours by wagon. Nora sat beside old Hector Gaines, the freight driver who owed her father a favor from years back. Hector didn't talk much. He chewed tobacco, spit into the dust, and kept his eyes on the rutted trail. After the first hour, he spoke. "You know who Caleb Mercer is?" "I know he's got land." "He's got more than land, girl. He's got the biggest cattle operation between Cheyenne and the Bighorn Basin. 3,000 head, 20 riders, a house with real glass windows." Nora said nothing. "He's also got a reputation," Hector continued. "Quiet man, hard worker, doesn't drink much, doesn't talk much, doesn't suffer fools." "Sounds reasonable." "Sounds lonely is what it sounds." Hector spit again. "His sister, your Margaret's friend, a woman named Clara Garrett. She's been trying to find him a wife for 2 years. He's refused every one." "Then why would he agree to meet me?" Hector gave her a long, sideways look. "He didn't agree to meet you. He agreed to meet whoever they sent. I reckon he's tired of fighting it." Nora let that settle. She was not a choice. She was a surrender. And Margaret had counted on that. She'd picked Nora specifically, poor, plain, unconnected, because she believed Caleb would take one look and refuse. Then Margaret could circle back to the real candidates, the ones with dowries, the ones with family names that meant something in territorial politics. Nora was the throwaway round. She understood this completely, and she went anyway. They arrived in the late afternoon. Hector pulled the wagon to a stop near a water trough. A young ranch hand, couldn't have been more than 17, jogged over. "You the one they sent?" the boy asked, looking at Nora like she was a piece of mail that had come to the wrong address. "I'm Eleanor Whitaker." "Yes, ma'am. They said to bring you to the kitchen." Not the parlor, not the front porch. The kitchen. Nora climbed down from the wagon without help. She smoothed her dress, the best one she owned, which wasn't saying much. Faded blue cotton, mended at the sleeve, clean but worn soft from years of washing. She followed the boy across the yard. The ranch was enormous. Even without looking carefully, she could feel the scale of it. The fences stretched out of sight. The barn was bigger than her entire cabin. Men moved with purpose, carrying feed, checking lines, shouting to each other in short bursts of work language. Nobody looked at her twice. She stepped into the kitchen. Maria Alvarez stood at the stove. A solid woman. Brown skin, dark hair pulled back tight, hands that had clearly done more work in one morning than most people did in a week. Maria looked Nora up and down, not with cruelty, with assessment. "You're the one Margaret Hale arranged?" "I am." "Sit down." Nora sat. Maria placed a glass of water in front of her. Then she leaned against the counter and folded her arms. "I'm going to tell you something, and I'm only going to say it once." "All right." "They sent you here to fail. Margaret Hale and Clara Garrett. They picked you because they think Caleb will refuse you. Then they'll send the woman they actually want, a widow from Laramie with money and connections." Nora drank the water slowly, set the glass down. "Thank you for telling me." "You're not surprised?" "No, ma'am, I'm not." Maria studied her for a long moment. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite approval, but something close to curiosity. "He'll be in from the range before supper. You'll wait here. I can help while I wait." Maria almost smiled. Almost. "The potatoes need peeling." Nora peeled potatoes for 2 hours. She didn't complain, didn't ask questions, didn't look out the window watching for riders. She worked, quietly, steadily, the way her mother had taught her before consumption took her when Nora was 14. "Work don't need an audience, Nora. It just needs doing." Maria watched her from the corner of her eye. The girl's hands were fast, efficient, no wasted movement. She handled the knife like someone who'd fed people on nothing most of her life. At some point, Margaret Hale herself walked into the kitchen. She was everything Nora was not. Silk dress, pinned hair, skin that had never seen a washboard. She carried herself like someone who'd been told she was important since birth and never had reason to question it. Margaret stopped when she saw Nora at the table. "Well," she said, "you actually came." "You invited me." "I arranged a meeting. I didn't think you'd have the nerve to show up." Nora set down the knife, wiped her hands on a cloth, looked directly at Margaret. "I'm here, Margaret." Margaret's smile was thin and precise, like a paper cut. "You should know, Caleb is particular. He's turned away women with far more to offer than a mended dress and a sick father." "Then he'll turn me away too, and I'll go home. But I won't be turned away from a kitchen I was asked to sit in." The air between them could have cracked glass. Maria kept her back turned, but her shoulders were stiff with listening. Margaret smoothed her gloves. "Suit yourself. I suppose everyone deserves to learn their place." She walked out. Nora picked up the knife and went back to the potatoes. Her hands were shaking, but she didn't stop. Caleb Mercer rode in just before sunset. Nora heard him before she saw him. The heavy rhythm of a tired horse, the creak of saddle leather, boots hitting hard-packed dirt. She was standing at the kitchen basin, washing the last of the supper preparations from her hands, when the back door swung open. He filled the doorway. Tall, broad through the shoulders in a way that came from years of work, not vanity. Dust covered him from hat to boots. A scar ran along the left side of his jaw. Old, healed white, but still visible. He pulled his hat off. Dark hair, damp with sweat. Eyes that moved fast, taking in the room in a single sweep. They landed on Nora. He didn't speak. She didn't either. Maria broke the silence. "Caleb, this is Eleanor Whitaker, Margaret's arrangement." He looked at Nora the way a man looks at something he wasn't expecting. Not with disappointment, but with recalibration. "Miss Whitaker." "Mr. Mercer." He hung his hat on the peg by the door, walked to the basin, washed his hands beside her without saying a word. She stepped aside to give him room. Their arms almost touched. He dried his hands, turned to face her fully. "My sister's friend told me you were coming. She said you were—" He stopped himself. "Poor?" Nora offered. His jaw tightened. "That isn't the word I'd use." "It's the word Margaret used. It's accurate enough." Something passed through his expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. The look of a man who'd just heard honesty in a house full of performance. "Why did you agree to come?" he asked. "To save my father." "Not yourself?" "I can save myself, Mr. Mercer. I've been doing it for years. But my father's pride is broken, and I can't fix that with pride alone. He needs work, real work, not charity." Caleb leaned against the counter, crossed his arms, studied her face like he was reading a contract, looking for the hidden clauses. "Margaret expects me to send you home tonight." "I know." "She's got another woman lined up. Widow from Laramie, good family, money." "I know that too." "And you came anyway." "I told you, I don't beg. But I don't run either." He was quiet for a long time. The kitchen ticked with the sound of the stove cooling, Maria's quiet movements in the pantry, the distant lowing of cattle settling for the night. Then he said something Nora didn't expect. "You'll stay a week." She blinked. "A week?" "7 days. You eat here. You sleep in the guest room, not the bunkhouse, not the barn. You work if you want to work. You rest if you need to rest. At the end of the week, we both decide." "Both?" "I'm not buying a horse, Miss Whitaker. I'm asking if two people can stand each other long enough to build something. That goes both directions." Nora's throat tightened. Not from sadness, from something she hadn't felt in a long time. Respect. "All right," she said. 1 week. He nodded once. No smile, no warmth exactly, but no cruelty either. He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "Miss Whitaker." "Yes?" "You're not what they described." He walked out into the fading light. Nora stood alone in the kitchen. Her hands were raw from the potatoes. Her dress was damp with basin water. She had no luggage, no dowry, no connections. But she had a week. Margaret found out within the hour. She came to the kitchen like a storm with good posture. "He's keeping her? For a week?" Maria didn't look up from the bread dough she was kneading. "That's what he said." "This is ridiculous. Look at her, Maria. She doesn't belong here." He didn't ask where she belongs. He asked her to stay. Margaret's face went tight. She turned to Nora, who was sitting at the table with a cup of weak coffee, still in her mended dress, still barefoot because she'd left her shoes by the door to avoid tracking dirt. "You think this means something?" Margaret's voice was low, controlled, but the edges were sharp. "He does this. He gives people chances because he's too stubborn to say no immediately. But he always says no eventually." Nora sipped her coffee. "Then I'll hear his no at the end of the week, Margaret. Not tonight." "You're wasting his time." Am I? Or am I wasting yours? Margaret went still. The kind of still that happens right before something breaks. Maria stepped between them, not physically, but with her voice. The guest room is ready. End of the hall, past the study. I'll bring you clean lemons. Nora stood. Thank you, Maria. She walked past Margaret without rushing, without dropping her eyes, without apology. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought the whole house could hear it. But her steps were steady. That first night, Nora couldn't sleep. The guest room was the nicest room she'd been in since her mother's funeral, when the church let them use the back parlor. A real bed with a frame, a washstand with a pitcher, a window that looked out over dark land stretching to the mountains. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her palms together between her knees. What are you doing here, Nora? She thought about her father, alone in the cabin, the way his hands shook when he tried to button his shirt since the lumber accident crushed his shoulder, the way he used to stand tall and now couldn't meet anyone's eyes. She thought about her mother's voice. You don't have to be rich, Nora. You just have to be worth something to yourself. She thought about Caleb Mercer's face when he'd said, You're not what they described. He hadn't said it with admiration, hadn't said it with desire. He'd said it with something quieter and harder to name. Confusion, maybe. Like a man who'd been handed something real after years of imitations. Nora lay down on the bed. She didn't pull back the covers. She didn't feel she'd earned that yet. She stared at the ceiling and made herself a promise. 7 days. No pretending. No performing. If he doesn't want me for what I am, then what I am will go home with its head up. Outside, coyotes called across the dark basin, and the wind carried the smell of sage and cattle and dust. Morning came fast. Nora was up before dawn. Old habit. Poverty teaches you that daylight is currency. You don't waste it. She found the kitchen already alive. Maria was there, moving with the efficiency of a woman who'd been running this operation long before anyone asked her to. You're early, Maria said. Force of habit. Coffee's on the stove, biscuits in 10 minutes. Nora poured herself a cup, stood at the counter, out of the way, but ready. What needs doing? She asked. Maria glanced at her. You don't have to earn your keep today. He said you could rest. I heard what he said. I'm asking what needs doing. The older woman's mouth twitched. The hands eat at 6, 22 men. They go through biscuits like locusts. I could use help with the gravy. Nora rolled up her sleeves. By the time the first ranch hands came in, there were 4 pans of biscuits and a pot of cream gravy big enough to bathe a child in. The men filed in, dusty and half awake. They looked at Nora, looked at Maria, looked at each other. Nobody said anything. Cowboys are like that. They notice everything and mention nothing until they've decided how they feel about it. One older man, Leatherface, gray mustache, missing the tip of his left index finger, stopped at the table. You make these biscuits, ma'am? Maria and I did. He took a bite, chewed slowly, nodded once. These'll do just fine. He sat down. The others followed. That was the closest thing to approval a stranger could get from working men on a Montana border spread, and Nora knew it. She didn't sit with them. She ate standing at the counter next to Maria, the way hired help does. Maria handed her a second biscuit without comment. Caleb appeared at 6:30. He'd clearly been up for hours. His clothes were different from last night. Work shirt, leather chaps already buckled, gloves tucked in his belt. He poured coffee, took a plate, sat at the far end of the table. He didn't greet Nora, didn't ignore her either. He simply existed in the same space without making a production of it. But she noticed him notice the gravy, the biscuits, the fact that the kitchen was already clean. He ate in silence. When he finished, he brought his plate to the basin himself, something Nora noted the other men didn't do. On his way out, he paused beside her. Not close, not far. The distance of a man who respected boundaries, but wanted to be heard. "You cooked." "I helped." "Maria doesn't let people help." Nora looked at him. Maybe she was tired of being asked. The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile, the ghost of one. He put his hat on and walked out. Maria, elbow deep in dishwater, said without turning around, "He liked the gravy."
"How can you tell?"
"He had 3 helpings. That man eats like a bird most mornings. 3 helpings means something." Nora didn't let herself feel anything about that. Not yet. It was day 1. She had 6 more to go, and hope was a luxury she'd learned to ration. But standing in that kitchen, sleeves rolled up, sweat already beading at her temples from the cook stove heat, she felt something she hadn't felt in longer than she could remember. She felt useful. Not pitied, not tolerated, not charity. Useful. And in the life Nora Whitaker had lived, that was worth more than any gold Margaret Hale could name. By the 3rd morning, Nora had learned the rhythm of the ranch the way a person learns a heartbeat when they sleep beside someone. Not by studying it, but by living inside it. She was up before dawn, coffee made before Maria arrived, biscuits cut and trayed before the first boots hit the porch. She didn't ask for permission to work. She just worked. And nobody told her to stop, which in ranch language meant she'd been accepted by the kitchen, if not by the house. Maria handed her an apron on the 3rd day. Didn't say anything, just held it out. Nora took it, tied it on. That was the closest thing to a ceremony either of them needed. But outside the kitchen, the ranch was watching. Cowboys talk. They don't gossip the way town women do. No whispered circles, no parlor cruelty. They talk the way weather moves. Slow, steady, impossible to stop. And by the 3rd day, every hand on Mercer Ranch knew the story. The poor girl, Margaret's little joke, the 1-week arrangement. They watched Nora the way men watch a horse they haven't decided to trust yet. From a distance, with quiet evaluation and absolutely no encouragement. Tom Booker, the foreman, was the first to say it out loud. He was sitting on the fence rail outside the barn, rolling a cigarette, when Caleb walked past. "She cook again this morning?" "She did."
"Good biscuits." Caleb kept walking. Tom called after him. "Cal." He stopped. "Margaret's been talking to Clara. They're sending a letter to the widow in Laramie, telling her to come end of the week." Caleb's back was to Tom, so the foreman couldn't see his face. But he saw the shoulders tighten, saw the pause. "Let them write their letters," Caleb said, and he walked on. Tom flicked his match into the dirt and shook his head. He'd worked for Caleb Mercer for 11 years. He knew the man better than anyone alive except maybe Maria. And he knew that voice. The one that sounded calm but had a blade underneath it. Something was shifting, and Tom wasn't sure Margaret understood how dangerous that was. Nora didn't know about the letter. She didn't know about the widow from Laramie. She knew what she could see, that every morning Caleb ate her biscuits without comment, that every evening he passed through the kitchen and said exactly 1 or 2 sentences to her, and that Margaret Hale watched all of it with a face like cracked porcelain. On the 3rd night, Margaret came to the kitchen after supper. Nora was alone. Maria had gone to her quarters. The house was quiet except for the pop of the cooling stove and the distant sound of men's voices from the bunkhouse. Margaret sat at the table. She didn't ask. She sat like someone who owned the chair, the table, the room, and the girl standing at the counter. "Sit down, Nora." Nora dried her hands. She sat. Not because Margaret told her to, but because she'd learned that standing over someone who wanted to feel powerful only made them meaner. "I want to be honest with you," Margaret said. "That'd be new." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Careful." "I'm always careful, Margaret. That's why I'm still here." Margaret folded her hands on the table. Her rings caught the lamplight. "You've had your little adventure. You've cooked some meals, made some biscuits. It's very charming, very pioneer woman. But you need to understand what's actually happening here. Tell me." "Caleb is a man with responsibilities. 3,000 head of cattle, 20 men on payroll, contracts with buyers in Cheyenne and Denver. He needs a wife who can manage a household, host territorial officials, navigate social obligations. He doesn't need a girl who peels potatoes." Nora didn't flinch. "Seems to me he hasn't asked for any of that." "He doesn't know what he needs. That's why Clara and I are helping." "Helping." Nora repeated the word like she was tasting something spoiled. "The widow from Laramie. Her name is Catherine Price. Her late husband was a territorial judge. She has education, breeding, connections that would benefit this ranch for generations. She arrives Saturday." Nora's stomach dropped. She kept her face still. Years of poverty had taught her that much. Never let them see you bleed. "So I have until Saturday." "You have until Caleb comes to his senses, which he will. He always does." Margaret stood, smoothed her skirt. "I'm not cruel, Nora. I'm practical. You don't belong in this world. The sooner you accept that, the less it'll hurt." She walked out. Nora sat at the table for a long time. Her hands were flat on the wood. Her breathing was even. But inside, something was burning. Not shame. She'd burned through all her shame years ago, standing in breadlines with her father, wearing shoes held together with twine. This was something else, something hotter and harder. It was the refusal to be erased. She stood up, washed her cup, hung the apron on its hook, went to the guest room, closed the door, and for the first time in 3 days, she let herself think about what it would mean to lose this. Not Caleb. She barely knew Caleb. What she'd lose was the feeling of being useful, of belonging somewhere that needed what she had, of waking up with purpose instead of dread. She couldn't lose that. She wouldn't. But she also wouldn't fight Margaret's way, with manipulation and whispered campaigns and social leverage. Nora had none of those weapons. She had her hands, her work, her word. If that wasn't enough, then nothing would be. The next morning, day 4, everything changed. Nora was carrying water from the pump when she heard Tom Booker shouting from the cattle pen. Not regular shouting, the kind that makes your blood go cold because it means something's dying or about to. "Caleb, get over here, now!" She set down the bucket and moved toward the pen. She didn't run. Running would have drawn attention. But she moved fast enough to arrive at the fence before Margaret, before Clara Garrett, who was visiting again, before anyone from the house. What she saw stopped her. 3 calves down in the pen, flat on their sides, breathing hard, foam at their mouths. 2 more staggering. Tom was kneeling beside the worst one, his hand on its neck. His face told the whole story before he said a word. Caleb came around the barn at a near run. He vaulted the fence without breaking stride and dropped beside Tom. "When?" "Found him like this 20 minutes ago. Started with the 2 on the east side. Now it's 5. "Fever?" "Burning up, all of them." Caleb pressed his hand to the calf's belly. His jaw clenched. He stood up and looked across the pen at the rest of the herd.
300 head of young stock pressed together in the summer heat. If it's Texas fever, we lose half of them by next week. Tom didn't argue, because they both knew it was true. Caleb turned to the nearest hand. Ride to town, get Doc Patterson. Tell him cattle fever, 5 down, 300 exposed. Go, now. The hand was on his horse in 30 seconds. Margaret appeared at the fence, Clara beside her, both of them pale. What's happening? Margaret demanded. Cattle fever, Caleb said without looking at her. Stay out of the pen. How bad? Bad enough. He was already moving, checking the water troughs, examining the feed, looking for the source. Tom followed him, and the two of them spoke in low, rapid exchanges that Nora couldn't hear from the fence. But she watched, and she listened, and she remembered. Her mother's family had farmed outside of St. Louis before they moved west. Small operation. Dairy cows, chickens, a vegetable garden. When Nora was 9, a fever swept through their stock. Her mother had spent 3 days in the barn, using methods her own grandmother had passed down. Cold water compresses, separation of sick animals, burning sulfur to clean the air, and a mixture of willow bark tea forced into the animals' throats to bring the fever down. It hadn't saved all of them, but it saved most. Nora climbed the fence. Hey! Tom shouted. Ma'am, you can't be in here. Is the water in these troughs from the creek or the well? Tom blinked. Creek, same as always. When's the last time you cleaned these troughs? Tom looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at Nora. What are you doing? Caleb asked. Not angry, genuinely asking. If the creek's contaminated upstream, dead animal, runoff, anything, it's in your water. Your calves are drinking fever. You need to switch to well water immediately and dump every trough in this pen. Silence. 20 men staring at a woman in a mended dress, standing in a cattle pen, telling them how to run their ranch. Margaret's voice came from outside the fence. For God's sake, Caleb, she's a cook. Get her out of there. Caleb didn't move. He was looking at Nora with an expression she couldn't read. Something between irritation and something else. Something sharper. You've seen this before, he said. It wasn't a question. My mother's stock, when I was 9, she saved 22 out of 30 using cold compresses and clean water. The ones we lost were the ones that drank from the contaminated trough the longest. Your mother was a rancher? My mother was a farmer's daughter who didn't wait for a veterinarian when her animals were dying. Another long silence. The calves were wheezing on the ground. Time was bleeding out. Caleb made a decision. Tom, dump the troughs. Every one. Switch to well water. Now. He turned to the hands. Separate the sick ones from the herd. Move the healthy stock to the north pen. And somebody get me cold water and clean rags. He looked at Nora. Show me what your mother did. Margaret's voice, sharp and disbelieving. You can't be serious. Caleb didn't even turn around. Margaret, go back to the house. Caleb, now. That single word carried more authority than anything Nora had ever heard. Not loud, not angry, just absolute. Margaret went, and Nora knelt in the dust beside a dying calf and got to work. For the next 6 hours, she didn't stop. She mixed willow bark tea from supplies Maria helped her find in the kitchen stores. She organized the hands into shifts. Cold compresses on the sick calves every 15 minutes, rotating through. She showed them how to force liquid into an animal's throat without choking it. She burned sage and sulfur near the pens to keep flies from spreading whatever was in the water. She didn't give orders like a boss. She worked alongside them. Her hands got raw, Her dress got ruined. She didn't care. Caleb worked next to her, not above her, beside her, passing rags, holding calves steady, doing exactly what she told him without hesitation. At one point, a young hand named Billy said under his breath to another rider, "We're taking orders from the potato girl now?" Caleb heard it. He straightened up, turned, and looked at Billy with a face that could have frozen a campfire. "You say something, Billy?" Billy went white. "No, sir." "Good, because that potato girl just did more in 2 hours than you've done all week. Get back to work." Billy got back to work. Fast. By late afternoon, Doc Patterson arrived from town. He examined the sick calves, checked the water Nora had flagged, and looked up at Caleb. "She's right. Contaminated water source. Probably a dead deer upstream. The creek's been carrying it for days." He looked at Nora, standing there with dirt on her face and willow bark staining her hands. "Who told you about the cold compresses?" "My mother." "Smart woman." "She was." Doc Patterson nodded. "You caught it early enough. You'll lose maybe 2 or 3 head. Without intervention, you'd have lost 40 or 50. The number hung in the air. 40 or 50 head of cattle. At market price, that was more money than Henry Whitaker would see in 10 lifetimes. Nora had just saved the ranch thousands of dollars with knowledge passed down from a dead woman who'd never owned more than 30 acres. Caleb walked over to her as the sun was going down. She was washing her hands at the well pump, exhausted, shaking slightly, running on nothing but coffee and stubbornness. He stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yes, I did." "Why?" She turned off the pump, dried her hands on what was left of her apron. "Because those animals were dying, and I knew how to help. That's enough of a reason." He was quiet. Then he said, quietly enough that only she could hear, "Margaret's bringing a woman from Laramie. Saturday. She thinks that's what I need." Nora's chest tightened. "I know. She told me." "She told you?" "Last night, in the kitchen. She was very clear about my place." Caleb's face did something complicated. Anger, maybe, or shame that it had happened under his roof. "What did you say?" "I said I'd be here until you told me not to be." He looked at her for a long time. The light was going copper and gold, and the dust was settling after the day's chaos. And somewhere behind them, 20 calves were alive because a woman in a ruined dress remembered what her mother taught her. "I'm not telling you to leave, Nora." She nodded, didn't trust her voice for anything more. He walked away. She stood at the pump and pressed her wet hands against her face and breathed. That night, Maria found her sitting on the back porch. Nora's hands were wrapped in strips of cloth because the lye and the willow bark had split her skin raw. Maria sat beside her, said nothing for a while. Then, "Tom told me what you did." "Tom talks too much." "Tom told me Caleb watched you all day, like a man waking up from a long sleep." Nora shook her head. "Don't do that, Maria." "Don't do what?" "Don't make it into something it's not. He's grateful, that's all. A grateful man isn't a man in love." "No," Maria agreed, "but a grateful man who watches a woman the way he watched you today, that's a man who's starting to understand what he's been missing." Nora pulled the cloth tighter around her cracked hands. "The widow comes Saturday." "She does." "Margaret will make sure of it." Maria stood up, brushed off her skirt. "Margaret makes sure of a lot of things. Doesn't mean they all go her way." She paused at the door. "You did good today, girl. Your mother would have been proud." She went inside. Nora stayed on the porch. The night was warm and still. Somewhere out in the dark, a calf she'd saved was breathing steady, and a man she barely knew had said her name like it meant something. And a woman from Laramie was packing her best dress for a Saturday she thought she'd already won. Day 5 started with trouble. Nora came into the kitchen at her usual hour and found Margaret already there. Not sitting, standing, with Clara Garrett beside her, and the man Nora had never seen. Tall, thin, spectacles, carrying a leather case. "This is Mr. Eldon Pratt," Margaret said. "He's a solicitor from Cheyenne." Nora stopped in the doorway. "He's here to review the ranch accounts and Caleb's legal affairs before Catherine Price arrives. Standard procedure for a marriage arrangement." "Does Caleb know he's here?" Margaret smiled. "Caleb will be informed." Nora looked at the solicitor. He looked uncomfortable, like a man who'd been paid well to be somewhere he didn't want to be. "Ma'am," he said to Nora, tipping his head. "Mr. Pratt?" Maria came in from the pantry. She took one look at the gathering, and her face went hard. "Margaret, you brought a lawyer into my kitchen before coffee's made?" "It's not your kitchen, Maria. It's Caleb's." "And does Caleb know there's a lawyer in it?" The same question. Margaret's smile didn't waver, but something behind it cracked. "I'll handle Caleb." "You'll try," Maria said. The solicitor shifted his weight. "Perhaps I should wait in the study." "The study's fine," Nora said, not because it was her place to say it, but because somebody needed to get this man out of the kitchen before the day went sideways before breakfast. The solicitor left. Clara followed him. Margaret stayed. She looked at Nora. "You think saving a few calves changes anything?" "I think saving 40 head of cattle changes quite a lot, actually." "This isn't about cattle, Nora. This is about what's best for Caleb and for this ranch. You're a distraction, a novelty. He feels sorry for you, and you're mistaking pity for something else." The words hit. Nora felt them land, felt them bruise. But she'd been bruised before, by harder hands and sharper words. "Is that what you tell yourself, Margaret? That he pities me?" "It's what I know." "Then you don't know him as well as you think." Margaret stepped closer, close enough that Nora could smell her perfume. Something floral and expensive, shipped from the East, the kind of scent that cost more than Nora's entire wardrobe. "I've known Caleb Mercer since he was 19 years old. I watched him build this ranch from nothing. I was here when his parents died. I was here when he buried his brother. You've been here 4 days, little girl. Don't tell me what I know." And then she left. The kitchen door swung shut behind her. Nora stood there, heart pounding, hands shaking. Maria put a cup of coffee in front of her. "Drink." Nora drank. "She's scared," Maria said. "She doesn't seem scared." Angry women and scared women look the same from the outside, but scared women fight dirtier. Maria started cracking eggs. "She brought a lawyer, Nora. That means she's already lost the argument with Caleb, and now she's trying to change the rules." "What do you mean?" "I mean she can't convince Caleb to send you away. So she's going to try to make it look official, legal, like there's a proper process for choosing a wife, and you don't meet the qualifications." "Can she do that?" Maria looked at her over the skillet. "She can try. The question is whether Caleb lets her." The answer came within the hour. Caleb walked into the study where Eldon Pratt was spreading papers on the desk. Margaret and Clara stood by the bookshelf like sentinels. "What is this?" Caleb's voice was low. "Standard review," Margaret said smoothly. "Before any major decision, I didn't ask for a review. I didn't invite a solicitor, and I sure as hell didn't ask you to turn my study into a courthouse." Pratt began gathering his papers. "Mr. Mercer, I was told—" "I don't care what you were told. You can stay for breakfast, and then you can ride back to Cheyenne. Bill, Margaret." Margaret's composure cracked. Just a hairline. Just enough.
Caleb, be reasonable. Catherine Price is coming in 2 days. There are arrangements.
There are no arrangements, Margaret. There's a woman coming to visit because you invited her, not because I asked. And there's a woman already here who saved half my calf stock yesterday while you stood at the fence in a silk dress. The room went quiet. Clara Garrett's mouth opened slightly. The solicitor's eyes went wide. Margaret's face drained of color.
"You're choosing her?" Margaret whispered. "A girl with nothing?"
Caleb stepped closer to his sister's oldest friend. His voice dropped to something barely above silence, but it filled the room like thunder fills a valley. I haven't chosen anyone yet. The week isn't over. But I'll tell you what I have decided. Nobody chooses for me. Not you, not Clara, not a solicitor from Cheyenne. If I marry someone who can stand in dust and do the work, not someone who can stand in a parlor and look pretty. He turned to Pratt. Breakfast is in 10 minutes. Maria makes good eggs. He walked out. Margaret stood in the study. Her hands were trembling. Not with sadness, with the special fury of a woman who has controlled a situation for years and just felt the reins rip free. Clara put a hand on her arm. "Margaret, don't." Margaret pulled away. "She'll be gone by Sunday. I'll make sure of it." But even as she said it, something in her voice had changed. A crack in the certainty. A fracture in the foundation she'd built her plans on. Because Caleb Mercer had just defended a barefoot girl with cracked hands over a lifetime of loyalty. And Margaret couldn't understand why. But Maria could. Standing at her stove, cracking eggs, hearing every word through walls that were thinner than Margaret realized. Maria smiled. Small. Private. The kind of smile a woman wears when she sees something she's been waiting years to see. A stubborn man, finally waking up. Saturday came the way a storm comes when you've been watching the horizon all week. Slow in the distance, then all at once. Nora was in the kitchen before first light, same as every morning. But this morning her hands moved differently. Faster, tighter. She dropped a cup and caught it before it hit the floor, and Maria looked at her, but said nothing. The widow from Laramie was coming today. Catherine Price. A territorial judge's wife. Education, money, connections. Everything Nora wasn't, arriving in a carriage Nora could never afford. Maria poured coffee and set it beside Nora's elbow. "You sleep at all?" "Some." "Liar." Nora almost smiled. "Maybe an hour." "Eat something. You look like a fence post." "I'm fine, Maria." "You're not fine. You're terrified and you're pretending you're not, which is worse because it takes more energy. Eat the biscuit." Nora ate the biscuit. The morning moved fast. The hands came in for breakfast. Nora served, cleaned, worked alongside Maria without a word wasted. The routine had become automatic. She knew which men took extra gravy, which ones wanted their coffee black, which ones said, "Ma'am," and which ones just nodded. Tom Booker came in last. He sat at the end of the table, ate slow, and when the other men filed out, he stayed. "Miss Whitaker." "Tom?" "You should know something." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. Margaret had Clara send word to 3 families in town. They're coming for supper tonight. She's turning this into a showing. "A showing?" "Like a cattle auction. Catherine Price on one side, you on the other. Let the good families of the territory see who's more suitable." Nora's stomach turned. "Does Caleb know?" "Caleb knows Margaret invited people. He doesn't know she's planning a competition. Tom stood, put his hat on. I'm telling you because you've earned it. What you did with those calves, that bought you more than a week, far as I'm concerned. But tonight's going to be ugly. Margaret doesn't lose gracefully. He walked out. Nora gripped the edge of the table. Her knuckles went white. Maria watched her from the stove. You heard him. I heard. What are you going to do? I'm going to cook supper for however many people Margaret invited. And I'm going to do it in this dress because it's the only one I have. And if that's not good enough for the territory, then the territory can choke on its own opinion. Maria's face broke into something Nora had never seen from her. A full, open grin. That's the first thing you've said all week that sounded like a woman who's done being scared. I'm still scared, Maria. Good. Scared means you care. Dead inside means you've given up. They cooked all morning. Roast beef from the ranch stock, potatoes, corn, fresh bread. Nora worked with a precision that came from years of making nothing taste like something. She seasoned with a light hand and a sure instinct, and Maria let her lead without interference. Around noon, the carriage arrived. Nora heard it from the kitchen, the rattle of wheels on dry ground, horses blowing, the creak of polished springs. Not a working wagon, but a proper carriage, the kind with cushioned seats and curtains. She didn't go to the window. She kept rolling dough. Maria went, came back. She's pretty, Maria said flatly. I didn't ask. Blonde, blue dress, real buttons. She's got a hat with a feather in it. Maria, just telling you what you're up against. Nora pressed the rolling pin harder. I'm not up against anyone. I'm making bread. But her jaw was tight, and her breath was short, and the rolling pin was leaving dents in the dough that had nothing to do with baking. Margaret was at the front door, of course, playing hostess like she owned the ranch, Clara beside her. The two of them in matching silk, hair pinned perfect, faces arranged in the particular expression of women who believe they're about to win. Catherine Price stepped down from the carriage with the careful grace of someone who'd been taught how to exit vehicles, how to hold her skirt, how to smile at people she'd never met as though she already liked them. She was 31, widow for 2 years, no children. Her husband had left her comfortable, not rich, but respectable. She had the kind of face that men noticed and women measured themselves against, and she knew it without being vain about it, which somehow made it worse. Margaret took her arm. Catherine, welcome. You must be exhausted from the journey. Not at all. The territory is beautiful this time of year. Wait until you see the ranch. Caleb has done extraordinary things with it. Catherine smiled politely. I'm looking forward to meeting him. He's out with the cattle. He'll be in before supper. In the meantime, let me show you to your room. They walked into the house. Past the kitchen door, Catherine glanced in and saw Nora, flower on her arms, hair falling loose, the mended dress now stained with a week's worth of honest work. Their eyes met. Catherine didn't look away quickly or dismissively. She held Nora's gaze for a full second with an expression Nora couldn't decipher. Not cruelty, not superiority. Something more complicated. Something almost like recognition. Then Margaret steered her away, and they were gone. Nora stood at the counter. Her hands had stopped moving. Maria touched her shoulder. Keep going, girl. Nora picked up the rolling pin, kept going. Caleb rode in at 4 o'clock. He came through the back, same as always. Boots first, then hat off, then hands in the basin. He stopped when he smelled the kitchen. You're cooking for an army. Margaret invited guests. Tom says 3 families from town. Caleb's expression darkened. She what? Supper tonight. Social occasion. Nora kept her voice neutral, even, like she was reading a list. The widow arrived at noon. Caleb stood at the basin, water dripping from his hands. He didn't move for a long count. Did Margaret tell you this was happening? Tom told me. Tom. He grabbed the towel, dried his hands with more force than necessary. I'll deal with Margaret. Caleb. He stopped. It was the first time she'd called him by his first name, without the Mr. They both noticed it. Neither acknowledged it. Don't fight her tonight, Nora said. Not in front of guests. That's what she wants. A scene. Something dramatic that she can use to show everyone you're not thinking clearly. If you fight her, she wins. He looked at her. Hard. Searching. Then what do I do? Let supper happen. Let people see what they see. And let me do what I've been doing all week. Cook? Work. He held her gaze. The kitchen was hot. The bread was rising. Somewhere outside, Margaret was arranging chairs in the dining room, like a general positioning troops. All right, he said. We do it your way. He walked out. Nora released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Maria was standing behind her with a platter of sliced beef. You just told the biggest rancher in Wyoming what to do in his own house. Somebody had to. And he listened. He's smart. He's more than smart, child. He's in trouble. He just doesn't know it yet. The supper was set for 7. By 6, 3 families had arrived. The Hendersons, who owned the feed store in town, the Clarks, who ran cattle east of the basin, and the Reverend Whitfield and his wife, who Margaret had clearly invited as a moral authority, someone who could bless or condemn whatever decision Caleb made. They gathered in the dining room. Proper china, candles. Margaret had pulled out everything she could find to make this look like a civilized affair, instead of what it actually was, an ambush. Catherine Price sat at Margaret's right. She wore a different dress now, dark green, well-fitted, appropriate. Her hair was up. She looked exactly like what Margaret wanted everyone to see, a woman who belonged in this room. Nora served. She carried plates, poured water, moved through the room like someone who understood service, not as degradation, but as discipline. Her dress was clean. She'd washed it and pressed it as best she could. But it was still the same mended cotton she'd arrived in. Still faded, still patched at the elbow. The contrast was brutal. Margaret had designed it that way. Mrs. Henderson leaned toward her husband and whispered something. Clark's wife kept her eyes on her plate. Reverend Whitfield watched Nora with an expression that was either compassion or calculation. Hard to tell with church people. Caleb sat at the head of the table. He ate. He answered questions when asked. He was polite to Catherine, distant to Margaret, and he tracked Nora's movements through the room without turning his head. Margaret ran the conversation like a conductor. Catherine, tell us about your work with the Laramie Ladies' Aid Society. Catherine obliged. She was articulate, warm, and clever. She talked about organizing supply drives for homesteaders, about fundraising for the territorial school, about her late husband's work establishing circuit courts in the Eastern Territory. She was, Nora had to admit, impressive. Not in the hollow way Margaret was impressive. Catherine seemed genuine. She cared about what she was saying. Her hands moved when she talked, and her eyes lit up when she described the children at the school. Under different circumstances, Nora might have liked her. Clark spoke up. Caleb, Margaret tells us you're considering settling down. About time, I'd say. Caleb set his fork down. Margaret tells people a lot of things. Nervous laughter around the table. Margaret's smile didn't waver. Well, Clark continued, a ranch this size needs a woman's hand. My Sarah's been telling me that for years, and she's never been wrong. Sarah Clark nodded firmly. A man alone is a man half built. Caleb said nothing. Reverend Whitfield cleared his throat. Marriage is a sacred bond. It should be entered into with prayer and consideration, not haste. Agreed, Caleb said. First time he'd engaged. Everyone leaned in slightly. And it should be between equals, the Reverend added. Margaret jumped on it. Exactly. Equals in standing, in temperament, in capability. Nora was at the sideboard, refilling the water pitcher. Her back was to the table, but every cell in her body was listening. Catherine Price spoke. I think equals in character matters more than equals in standing. The table went quiet. Margaret blinked. Of course, character is important, but my husband was a judge, Catherine continued calmly. He came from nothing. His father was a blacksmith in Ohio. He built everything he had through work and integrity. If we're measuring equals, I'd say the measure should be what a person does, not what they have. Nora's hand stopped on the pitcher. Margaret recovered quickly. Naturally. And Catherine, your own accomplishments speak volumes. I wasn't talking about myself. Another silence, heavier this time. Catherine turned in her chair and looked directly at Nora. You're Eleanor, aren't you? The one who saved the calves this week? Every eye in the room shifted. Nora turned from the sideboard, pitcher in hand. Yes, ma'am. Tom Booker told me about it when I arrived. He said you worked 6 hours straight and lost only 2 head out of how many? 5 were sick. 300 were at risk. With knowledge from your mother? Yes, ma'am. Catherine nodded slowly. Then she turned back to the table and picked up her fork. Margaret, the roast is wonderful. Did Maria make it? Yes, Maria and Eleanor, Catherine said. Tom told me she's been running the kitchen all week. Margaret's fork made a small, sharp sound against her plate. The supper continued, but the ground had shifted. Nora felt it. Margaret felt it. Caleb felt it. The room had been set up as a showcase for Catherine Price's superiority, and Catherine Price herself had just refused to play her part. After supper, Nora cleared the dishes. The guests moved to the porch for evening air. Margaret attached herself to Catherine's arm like a vine to a post, talking steadily, redirecting, reframing. Nora was elbow-deep in dishwater when footsteps came from the dining room. Catherine Price stood in the kitchen doorway, alone. May I help? Nora stared at her. You're a guest. I'm a woman who knows how to wash a dish. Catherine rolled up her sleeves and walked to the basin. Wash or dry? I wash. I'm already wet. Catherine picked up a towel and started drying. They worked in silence for a minute. Then Catherine spoke. Margaret didn't tell me about you. No, she wouldn't have. She told me Caleb was lonely and stubborn and needed a proper wife. She made it sound like a rescue mission. Catherine dried a plate and set it in the stack. When I got here and saw you in this kitchen, I understood what was really happening. Nora scrubbed a pot, didn't look up. What's really happening? A contest I didn't agree to enter. Nora stopped scrubbing. Catherine turned to her. I came here because I was lonely too. My husband's been dead 2 years. I thought maybe Margaret was right. Maybe I needed a new start, and maybe Caleb needed the same. But I didn't come here to take something from someone who earned it. I haven't earned anything, Mrs. Price. Catherine. And you've earned more than you know. I watched him tonight. Every time you moved through that room, he knew exactly where you were. A man doesn't track a woman like that out of pity. Nora's hands went still in the water. He hasn't said anything, Nora whispered. Men like Caleb don't say things. They do things. He let you stay. He let you work. He defended you against his oldest friend. He took your advice about tonight. Catherine folded the towel. Where I come from, that's more than words.
The kitchen door swung open. Margaret stood there. She looked at Catherine, then at Nora, then at the dishes they'd been washing together. Her face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds: shock, fury, and something that looked almost like despair. "Catherine, the Reverend wants to say goodnight." "Of course." Catherine set down the towel. She looked at Nora one more time. "Thank you for supper. It was the best meal I've had in 2 years." She walked out. Margaret stayed. She looked at Nora with eyes that were no longer calculating. They were desperate. "What did she say to you?" "She said the roast was good." "Don't play games with me, Nora." "I'm not playing anything, Margaret. I never was. That's what you can't stand." Margaret's chin trembled. Just barely. Just enough. "You don't understand what you're destroying." "I'm not destroying anything. I'm washing dishes." Margaret left. The kitchen door swung shut. The latch caught. Nora braced her hands on the edge of the basin, dropped her head, breathed. Maria appeared from the pantry like she'd been standing there the entire time, which she probably had. "The widow's got spine," Maria said. "She's a good woman." "She is, and she just gave you the only thing Margaret can't take away." "What's that?" "An ally." The guests left by 9. The Henderson wagon rolled out first, then the Clarks, then the Reverend and his wife. Margaret and Clara retreated to the guest wing. Catherine went to her room. The house fell quiet. Nora was on the back porch, unwrapping the cloth from her cracked hands, when Caleb came around the corner. He sat on the step below her, took his hat off, held it between his knees. They sat in the dark without speaking for a long time. "Catherine seems like a fine woman," Nora said. "She is." Margaret chose well, even if she chose for the wrong reasons. Caleb turned the hat in his hands. "Catherine told me she's leaving tomorrow." Nora's breath caught. "Leaving?" "She pulled me aside after supper. Said she didn't come here to compete with anyone, and she won't. Said if I'm interested, I know where to find her. But she won't be part of whatever Margaret's orchestrating." That's decent of her." "It is." "Then why do you sound angry?" Caleb looked up at her. In the dark, she couldn't see his eyes clearly, but she could feel the intensity of them. "Because I'm not angry at Catherine. I'm angry at Margaret for putting everyone in this position. I'm angry that the best woman in this territory had to wash dishes in my kitchen to prove she's human. I'm angry that you've been here 6 days, and you still think you have to earn the right to sit on my porch." Nora's throat closed. I don't think—" "You're sitting above me right now, Nora. I'm on the lower step. You notice that?" She hadn't. "I chose this step," he said, "on purpose, because I'm tired of people looking up at me like I'm something to be impressed by. I wanted to sit below someone real for once." She couldn't speak. Her hands were shaking in her lap, and the cloth wrappings were coming loose, and she didn't care. "Ask me something," he said. "What?" "Anything. Something you actually want to know. Not something polite. Not something safe." Nora swallowed. "Why did you never marry? You're 34 years old, you've got everything a woman could want, and you've said no to everyone they've sent. Why?" He was quiet for a long time. "Because every woman they sent was performing. Every single one. They wore their best dress and their best smile, and they said what they thought I wanted to hear. And I could feel it, that gap between who they were and who they were pretending to be. It made me sick. And me? You showed up in a mended dress and peeled potatoes for 2 hours before I even walked in the door. You told me to my face that you came to save your father, not yourself. You climbed into a cattle pen in the middle of a fever outbreak and saved my stock with your dead mother's recipe. He paused. You never performed. Not once. And it scares the hell out of me, because I don't know what to do with someone real. The night pressed around them, warm, heavy, full of things neither of them had the courage to name yet.
"The week ends tomorrow," Nora said.
I know. You said we'd both decide. I did. Have you decided? He stood up, put his hat on, looked down at her, and she realized that even standing above her, he somehow made it feel like he was still looking up. I decided 3 days ago, Nora. I've just been waiting to see if you'd stay long enough to hear it. He walked into the house. Nora sat on the porch. The stars were out. All of them, it seemed, like someone had tipped a bucket of light across the sky. She pressed her cracked hands together, felt the sting, felt the rough edges of skin that had split from work and lie and willow bark. And she made her decision too. Tomorrow was day 7. The last day. The day Margaret would make her final move, whatever it was. The day Catherine Price would leave, with more grace than anyone in this story deserved. The day Caleb Mercer would say out loud what he'd been carrying behind his ribs for 3 days.
But right now, in this moment, Nora Whitaker was sitting on the porch of a ranch she'd been sent to as a joke, wearing a dress that had been mended so many times the original fabric was mostly memory, with hands that hurt, and a heart that was beating so hard she could feel it in her teeth. And she wasn't going anywhere. Nora woke on day 7 to the sound of a carriage leaving. She was at the window before her feet fully registered the cold floor. The first light was barely up, and Catherine Price's carriage was already pulling away from the house, moving steady down the long road toward town. No fanfare, no goodbye tour. Catherine had said she'd leave, and she left. Clean, dignified, the way a woman leaves when she respects herself enough not to linger where she's not needed. Nora watched until the carriage disappeared into the dust. Then she got dressed, tied her hair back, and went to the kitchen. Maria was already there. Of course she was. "She's gone," Nora said. "Left a note for Caleb on the study desk. I saw her put it there an hour ago."
"Did you read it?"
Maria gave her a look that could have curdled milk. "I don't read other people's letters." "Sorry." "You should be." Maria cracked eggs. "Margaret doesn't know yet. She'll lose her mind when she finds out." "How long do we have?" "Margaret sleeps until 7, Clara until 8. That gives you about 90 minutes of peace." Nora poured coffee. Her hands were steadier than they'd been in days. Something had settled in her overnight. Not confidence exactly, but decision. The kind of bone-deep knowing that comes when you've weighed every option and the scale finally tips. She'd made her choice on the porch last night. She was staying. Not because Caleb had said he'd decided. Not because Catherine had left. Not because Margaret was losing. She was staying because this was the first place in her adult life where her work meant something, where her presence changed the shape of a day, where someone looked at her and saw more than poverty wearing a dress. She was staying for herself. "Maria, thank you for everything this week." Maria didn't look up from the eggs, but her hand stopped moving for just a moment. "Don't thank me yet. Today's going to be the hardest day you've had here." "Why?" "Because Margaret's got nothing left to lose. And people with nothing to lose do the ugliest things." Maria was right. She was right by exactly 93 minutes. Margaret came into the kitchen at 7:12. Her hair was pinned, but not perfect. Her dress was buttoned wrong at the collar. Small details, but on Margaret, they screamed. She'd already been to Catherine's room, found it empty. "Where is she?" Maria kept cooking. "Left at dawn." "Left? She left?" Margaret's voice was flat, controlled, the voice of a woman holding a scream behind her teeth. "And nobody thought to wake me?" She didn't ask anyone to be woken. She made her own choice. Margaret turned to Nora. "You did this." "I was asleep, Margaret. Don't lie to me. You talked to her last night. In this kitchen, I saw you washing dishes together like old friends. What did you say to her?" "She asked to help. We washed dishes. She said the roast was good. She was supposed to stay through Monday. Caleb was supposed to see her properly, ride with her, talk with her, see what a real partnership could look like." Seems like Catherine had her own ideas about that. Margaret slammed her hand on the table. The cups rattled. Maria flinched. Nora didn't. "You think you've won?" Margaret's voice cracked. Not with anger anymore, with something rawer. "You think because some pretty widow felt sorry for you and left, that means you've won?" "I'm not trying to win anything." "Then what are you trying to do, Nora? What is your plan? You marry Caleb, and then what? You host territorial dinners in that dress? You shake hands with cattle buyers with those cracked fingers? You sit in a parlor and discuss politics with women who've been educated since birth?" Every word landed. Nora felt them like stones hitting water, each one sending ripples deeper than the last. "You'll embarrass him," Margaret whispered. "Maybe not today. Maybe not this year. But eventually you'll stand in a room where you don't belong, and everyone will know it. And he'll know it. And he'll look at you the way men look at mistakes they can't undo." The kitchen was silent. The eggs hissed on the stove. Maria had stopped moving entirely. Nora looked at Margaret, looked at the woman who'd orchestrated her humiliation, who'd brought in lawyers and rivals and social artillery, who'd spent a week trying to break her. And she saw something she hadn't expected. Fear. Real fear. Not of Nora, not even of losing control. Margaret was afraid because she loved Caleb. Not romantically, that wasn't it. She loved him the way a sister loves a brother she's protected since childhood. She'd watched him bury his parents, bury his brother, build this ranch from dirt and stubbornness. She'd appointed herself his guardian, and the thought of him choosing wrong terrified her more than losing. Nora saw all of this in the space of a heartbeat. "Margaret, don't." "Margaret, sit down." "I will not." "Sit down, please." Something in Nora's voice, not authority, not command, but the quiet certainty of a woman who'd stopped being afraid, made Margaret pause. She didn't sit, but she stopped. "You're right," Nora said, "about some of it. I can't host a territorial dinner. I don't know politics. I don't know which fork to use when there's more than one. I didn't go to school past the age of 13 because my mother died and my father couldn't afford it, and somebody had to keep us alive." Margaret's jaw tightened. "But I know how to work. I know how to keep people fed. I know how to save cattle when they're dying, and how to stretch a dollar until it screams, and how to stand in a room full of people who think I'm nothing, and stay standing." She took a breath. "And I know that Caleb Mercer doesn't need someone to impress the territory. He needs someone who'll still be here when the territory stops watching." Margaret stared at her. The fight was still in her eyes, but it was losing ground to something else, something tired and old and almost relieved. "He's going to get hurt," Margaret said quietly. "Maybe. People in love usually do." "You love him?" Nora paused, thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything, carefully, without decoration. "I don't know yet. I know I respect him. I know he makes me feel like a person instead of a problem. I know I'd rather stand in his kitchen with cracked hands than sit in the finest parlor in Laramie." "That's not love," Maybe not, but it's the ground love grows in, and it's more honest than anything Margaret Hale has planted here this week." Maria turned back to the stove. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Margaret stood in the kitchen for a long, long moment. Then she did something Nora never expected. She sat down. Not with grace, not with control. She sat down the way people sit when their legs give out, when the weight of fighting finally exceeds the strength to keep standing. "His brother was like this," Margaret said quietly. "Jacob, Caleb's younger brother. He fell in love with a girl from nowhere, a miner's daughter. Pretty thing, sweet. Everyone told him no. His parents, Clara, me." Nora listened. "He married her anyway. They were happy for about a year. Then the drought of '76 hit. The ranch nearly collapsed. She couldn't handle it, the isolation, the poverty, the worry. She left, took a coach east, and never came back." Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. "Jacob rode out the next morning looking for a stray calf. They found him at the bottom of a ravine 3 days later. His horse came back without him." Nora's chest clenched. "Margaret, Caleb doesn't talk about it. Ever. He hasn't said Jacob's name in 6 years. But I was there. I held him when they brought the body in. I watched him build a coffin with his own hands because he wouldn't let anyone else touch it." Margaret looked at Nora with eyes that had gone wet and fierce. "So when I say I'm afraid of him choosing wrong, I'm not talking about dinner parties and forks. I'm talking about a man who already lost one person he loved because she couldn't stay. If you can't stay, if this gets hard and you run, it won't just break his heart. It'll finish what started in that ravine." The kitchen was so quiet, Nora could hear her own pulse. She understood now. All of it. The manipulation, the cruelty, the lawyers and rivals and social warfare. Margaret wasn't a villain. She was a woman who'd watched someone she loved almost die from grief. And she'd spent the last 6 years building walls around him to make sure it never happened again. And Nora had just walked through every single wall. "I'm not going to run, Margaret. You say that now. I say it now because it's true. I've been poor my whole life. I've watched my mother die. I've carried my father when he couldn't walk. I've gone hungry so he could eat. I've worn the same dress for 3 years and mended it so many times I've lost count." She leaned forward. "I don't run from hard things. Hard things are all I know." Margaret looked at her. Really looked. Not the way she'd been looking all week. Appraising, dismissing, calculating. She looked at Nora the way you look at something when you finally stop trying to make it into something else and you just see what it is. "I hope you're telling the truth," Margaret said. "You'll know soon enough." Margaret stood, straightened her collar, fixed the button she'd missed. When she spoke again, her voice was controlled, but the edges were different, softer, exhausted. "I'm going to pack. Clara and I will leave today." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. Whatever happens next between you and Caleb, it shouldn't happen with me standing in the corner waiting for it to fail." She paused at the door. "If you hurt him, Nora Whitaker, I will never forgive you. If I hurt him, I'll never forgive myself." Margaret left. Maria turned from the stove. Her eyes were red. She'd been crying silently the whole time. "In 11 years," Maria said, "I have never heard Margaret Hale admit she was wrong." She didn't admit she was wrong. She sat down, Nora. In Margaret's language, that's the same thing. Caleb found Catherine's letter in the study at 8 o'clock. He read it standing up, folded it, put it in his shirt pocket. Then he went to find Nora. She was on the back porch, sitting on the top step this time. Her hands were in her lap, unwrapped for the first time all week. The splits in her skin were healing. New pink lines where the cracks had been. Mending, like everything else about her. He sat beside her. Same step. Not above, not below. "Catherine left," he said. "I know." "Margaret's leaving too. She told me 10 minutes ago." Nora looked at him. "How was she?" "Quiet, which is more terrifying than when she's loud." He almost smiled. "She told me I'm making a mistake." "Are you?" "I've made a lot of mistakes, Nora. Buying that bull from Henderson. Mistake. Trusting the South Creek for water. Mistake. Letting Margaret run my personal life for 6 years. Big mistake." He turned to face her. "But this week wasn't a mistake, and you aren't a mistake. And if I'm wrong about that, I'd rather be wrong about you than right about anyone else." Nora's eyes burned. She blinked hard. She would not cry. Not now. Not after holding it together for 7 days through manipulation and cattle fever and Margaret Hale and a widow from Laramie and her own bone-deep terror. She would not cry. She cried. Not a lot, not dramatically. The way water comes through a crack in a dam. Steady, unstoppable, and long overdue. Caleb didn't touch her, didn't hold her. He sat beside her and let her have it, the way a man does when he understands that some things need to come out before anything new can go in. When she stopped, she wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Sorry." "Don't be." "I haven't cried in 4 years." "Then you were overdue." She laughed. It came out rough and wet and surprised, and it was the best sound Caleb Mercer had heard since his brother's laugh. And that thought hit him so hard, he had to look away. "I have one condition," Nora said. "Name it." "My father works, real work, not charity. You find something he can do with one good arm and his dignity, and he does it for fair pay. He's a Whitaker, and Whitakers don't take handouts. He can keep the books. I need someone I trust on the numbers. And if he's half as stubborn as his daughter, he'll have this ranch profitable in a year." Nora looked at him. "You already thought about this." "I thought about it on day 3. "Day 3? That was before the cattle fever, before Catherine, before any of it." "It was the morning after you made biscuits, when you ate standing at the counter next to Maria, because you thought you hadn't earned a seat." He paused. "That's when I knew." "Knew what?" "That you weren't performing, that you didn't know how, that you were the most honest person I'd met in years, and I was going to fight like hell to keep you here." Nora pressed her hands against her knees. The healing cracks stung. She didn't mind. "I'm not saying yes to a proposal, Caleb. You haven't proposed." "No, I haven't." "Good. Because it's been 1 week, and I peel potatoes and save calves, and that's not enough to build a marriage on." "What do you suggest?" "I suggest you court me. Properly. The way a man courts a woman he respects. You take me riding. You introduce me to your neighbors as something other than Margaret's project. You let me meet your foreman's wife and your cattle buyers and the people who make up your life. And if, after all of that, we both still want this, then you ask me properly. On a day when I'm not covered in flour." Caleb stared at her. Then he did something she'd never seen him do. He smiled. Full. Open. The kind of smile that transforms a serious face into something younger and lighter and startlingly human. "Yes, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am. You're not a ranch hand." "What should I call you?" "Nora's fine. It's always been fine." Nora. He said it the way some men say a prayer. Not loud, not showy, just honest. Can I start the courting today? You can start by fixing the third step on the front porch. I almost broke my ankle on it yesterday. That's courting? That's practical. Courting comes after the step is fixed. He stood up, put his hat on, looked down at her with that half-smile still lingering. I'll get my tools. Caleb. He stopped. Thank you. For the week. For not sending me home. Thank you for not going. He walked toward the barn. Nora sat on the porch and let the morning settle around her. Maria appeared at the back door with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Nora and sat beside her. Margaret's carriage is being loaded. I know. Clara's going with her. Good. Caleb's getting his toolbox. I told him to fix the front step. Maria sipped her coffee. You told the man who just declared himself to go fix a step. The step is dangerous, Maria. The step has been dangerous for 2 years. You're deflecting because you're happy and you don't know what to do with it. Nora looked at her coffee. Maybe. Definitely. They sat together, 2 women on a porch in Wyoming, drinking coffee on a summer morning that felt different from every morning before it. Not because anything dramatic was happening, but because something had finally stopped. The tension, the uncertainty, the constant bracing for the next blow. For the first time in 7 days, for the first time in years, Nora Whitaker was sitting still without waiting for something bad to happen. It felt strange, uncomfortable even, like wearing new shoes that hadn't been broken in yet. But it fit. Margaret's carriage left at 10. Nora didn't watch from the window this time. She was in the kitchen, planning the week's meals with Maria, writing lists on the back of an old envelope because there wasn't any proper paper. Maria looked at the lists. You're planning for 22 men. 22 hands plus Caleb plus you and me. And your father, when's he coming? Nora paused. Caleb said he could keep the books. I heard. Tom will ride to town tomorrow and bring him back, if you give the word. Nora set down the pencil. Give the word. Maria nodded. About time that old man had something to do besides feel sorry for himself. Maria, I say it with love. I've never met your father, and I already respect him because he raised you. But a man without work is a man disappearing, and I suspect Henry Whitaker's been disappearing for a while. Nora didn't argue, because it was true. Tom rode out the next morning. He carried a letter from Nora, 3 lines long, because Whitakers didn't waste words any more than they wasted money. Pa, there's work here, real work. Bring your good shirt and your reading glasses. I'll explain when you arrive. Nora. The afternoon was quiet. Caleb fixed the front step. Then he fixed the gate hinge that had been squeaking. Then he replaced a cracked board on the porch railing. Nora came out at 3 with a glass of water. You've been at this for 4 hours. You said courting starts after the step. I said courting starts after the step is fixed. You've now fixed the step, the gate, and half the porch. That's not courting, that's renovation. He took the water, drank it, looked at her over the rim of the glass. What counts as courting, then? Walking? Talking? Telling me something about yourself that doesn't involve cattle or fence posts? I don't know if I have anything that doesn't involve cattle or fence posts. Try. He set down the glass, took off his gloves, leaned against the railing he'd just repaired. When I was 12, my brother Jacob and I found a hawk with a broken wing behind the barn. We built a splint out of sticks and my mother's sewing thread. Fed it for 6 weeks. It healed and flew away, and Jacob cried for an hour because he wanted to keep it. He paused. I told him you can't keep something wild. You can only love it enough to let it choose to stay. Nora stood on the porch. The glass of water was in her hand. The afternoon was hot and still and full of dust and something that felt like the beginning of the rest of her life. "That counts," she said softly. "As courting?" "As everything." He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them moved. The distance between them was 3 feet of porch board and 6 years of grief and a week of impossibility, and neither of them closed it. Not yet. But the gap was getting smaller, and for the first time, neither one of them was afraid of what would happen when it finally closed. Henry Whitaker arrived on a Tuesday. Tom Booker brought him in on the supply wagon, and Nora heard the wheels before she saw the man. She set down the bread knife, wiped her hands, and walked to the front of the house without running, because running would have told everyone watching how scared she was. Scared that he'd look worse than she remembered. Scared that the ride had been too much. Scared that he'd see this ranch and this life and this man she was building something with and think she'd lost her mind. Henry climbed down from the wagon with his left arm tucked against his body, the way it always was now, bent at the elbow, the shoulder frozen from the lumber accident, the hand still functional but weak. He was thinner than 3 weeks ago. His shirt was clean but hung loose at the collar. He looked at Nora. She looked at him. Neither of them spoke. Whitakers didn't make scenes. They held things in and let the pressure build until it came out sideways in hard work or long silences, or, on rare occasions, a single sentence that carried the weight of everything they couldn't say. Henry said, "You look fed." Nora's throat closed. "I am." "Good." He looked at the ranch, at the fences and the barn, and the house with its new porch step and repaired railing. His eyes moved the way a man's eyes move when he's measuring something against everything he's lost. "This the place?" "This is the place, Pa." "And the man?" Caleb came around the side of the barn. He'd been waiting. Nora knew that because he'd asked her what time Tom expected to arrive, and then disappeared exactly 30 minutes before, which was Caleb's version of giving someone privacy while staying close enough to matter. He walked up to Henry, took his hat off, extended his hand. "Mr. Whitaker, I'm Caleb Mercer." Henry looked at the hand, then at the man, then at Nora, then back at the hand. He shook it, firm, one pump, the way men shake hands when they're deciding whether to trust each other or hit each other. "My daughter tells me you need a bookkeeper." "I do." "She tell you I can't lift my right arm past my chest?" "She did." "And you don't care about that?" "I care about numbers, Mr. Whitaker. I care about someone who can look at a ledger and tell me if I'm making money or bleeding it. Tom tells me you kept accounts for the lumber company in town for 8 years. 7 years and 4 months, before the accident. Can you still do the work?" Henry straightened. It wasn't much, maybe an inch, maybe 2. But it was the most vertical Nora had seen him stand in a year. "I can do the work." "Then the job's yours. Room in the bunkhouse unless you want something else. 3 meals a day, fair wage. And if you catch anyone cheating the numbers, you tell me directly. Not Tom, not Maria, me." Henry studied Caleb's face the way Nora had on that first night, looking for the catch, the charity, the pity dressed up as opportunity. He didn't find it. "When do I start?" "Ledgers are in the study. Maria will show you. Start whenever you're ready." "I'm ready now." Caleb nodded, put his hat back on, walked away. Henry watched him go. Then he turned to Nora. "He's not what I expected." "Nobody expected him, Pa. That's the whole point." Henry Whitaker started on the books that same afternoon. Maria set him up at the desk in the study with 3 years of ledgers, a pot of ink,
and a cup of coffee strong enough to strip paint. By evening, he'd found 2 errors in the feed accounts and a discrepancy in the cattle sale records from April. He brought them to Caleb at supper. "Your feed supplier is overcharging you by 12%. Either he's bad at arithmetic, or he thinks you're too busy to check." Caleb looked at the numbers, looked at Henry.
Which do you think? I think a man who's bad at arithmetic doesn't make the same mistake every month for 8 months running. Caleb's jaw tightened. Tom handles the feed orders. Tom's a good foreman. He's not an accountant. You need someone watching the money who does nothing but watch the money. That's what I hired you for. Henry closed the ledger. Then I'll need access to all accounts, not just the ones Margaret's friend organized, all of them. You'll have it tomorrow morning. Henry stood, tucked the ledger under his good arm, walked toward the door. Stopped. "Mr. Mercer." "Caleb. Caleb, my daughter is the best thing I ever did in this life. The only thing I got right. If you're serious about her, you should know that. I know it, sir. And if you're not serious, you should tell her now, before she builds something here she can't take with her when she leaves." "She's not leaving, Mr. Whitaker." "How do you know?" "Because I asked her to stay, and she told me to fix the porch step first." A woman who's planning to leave doesn't care about the porch step. Henry's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but the closest thing to one Nora had seen from him in over a year. He left the room. Caleb sat at the supper table alone, looked at the numbers Henry had found, shook his head. Tom appeared in the doorway. "He any good?" "He found 12% theft in 3 hours, Tom." Tom whistled low. "I'll talk to the feed supplier." "Don't talk. Switch suppliers. And tell the old one exactly why." "That'll burn a bridge." "Good. I don't need bridges with thieves." Tom grinned. "The Whitakers are going to run this ranch better than we do." "That's the idea." The weeks turned, not fast, not slow. The way time moves on a working ranch, measured in tasks completed rather than hours passed. Nora cooked. She ran the kitchen with Maria until Maria started stepping back. Not because she was pushed, but because she recognized capability when she saw it. By the 3rd week, Nora was handling the meal planning alone. By the 4th, she was managing the kitchen budget, and she cut food costs by 9% without reducing a single portion. "How?" Maria asked, looking at the numbers. "We were throwing out bread ends and vegetable trimmings. I make stock from the scraps and croutons from the bread. My mother taught me that a kitchen doesn't have waste. It has ingredients you haven't used yet." Maria shook her head. "I've been cooking for 30 years, and nobody ever told me that." "Nobody told my mother either. She figured it out because she had to." Henry worked the books. He worked them the way a man works when he's been given back his purpose. Meticulously, fiercely, with a focus that bordered on obsession. Within 6 weeks, he'd restructured the entire accounting system, identified 3 more overcharges from suppliers, and negotiated a better rate on cattle transport to Cheyenne. Caleb stopped reviewing Henry's work after the 2nd week. Not because he didn't care, because he didn't need to. "Your father's the best hire I've made in 5 years," Caleb told Nora one evening on the porch. "Don't tell him that. His head's barely fitting through the study door as it is." "I mean it. He saved this ranch more money in 6 weeks than Margaret's solicitor friend made in 6 years of managing the accounts." Nora paused. Margaret's friend was managing the accounts? "Eldon Pratt, the lawyer from Cheyenne. He handled the books before your father. Margaret set it up." "And he was overcharging the feed supplier?" "He was looking the other way while the feed supplier overcharged us. Different thing. Same result." Nora let that sink in. "Margaret was skimming from you?" "Not Margaret. Her network. Her system. Everyone she put in place was taking a little off the top. Not enough to notice, unless someone who actually understood numbers sat down and looked. Someone like my father. Someone exactly like your father. Nora sat with the weight of that. Margaret hadn't just been controlling Caleb's personal life. She'd been controlling his business. Her entire operation, the matchmaking, the social engineering, the lawyers and friends and territorial connections, had been built on a foundation of financial dependence. As long as Caleb relied on Margaret's people for his accounts, his legal work, his social standing, she held the strings. Henry Whitaker, with one good arm and a sharp eye, had cut those strings in 6 weeks. Does Margaret know? I wrote her a letter. Told her what Henry found. Told her Pratt's been dismissed and I'm handling my own affairs from now on. What did she say? She hasn't written back. Nora nodded. She didn't feel triumph. She felt something closer to sadness. For Margaret, who'd built an empire of control out of love and fear, and watched it come apart because a poor man with a broken shoulder could add better than her lawyer. She wasn't all bad, Caleb. I know. She loved Jacob. She loved me. She just loved us the wrong way. There's no wrong way to love someone. There is when your love turns into a cage. They sat on the porch. The evening was cooling. Somewhere in the bunkhouse, someone was playing a harmonica, badly, and someone else was telling him to stop. Are you going to propose to me? Nora asked. Caleb choked on his coffee. Actually choked. Coughed. Wiped his mouth. Did you just... You've been courting me for 6 weeks. You fixed every broken thing on this property. You took me riding 4 times. You introduced me to every rancher in the basin. You bought me a new dress from the mercantile in town, which I haven't worn yet because I don't waste nice things on Tuesdays. It's Wednesday. I don't waste nice things on Wednesdays either. My point is, Caleb Mercer, are you building towards something, or are you just going to keep fixing hinges until this ranch runs out of doors? He set his coffee down, turned to face her fully. I was planning to ask you Sunday, after church. I talked to Reverend Whitfield last week. You talked to the Reverend before you talked to me? I talked to your father first, then the Reverend, then I was going to talk to you. And what did my father say? He said, "It's about damn time," which is the most words he's said to me in a row since he got here. Nora laughed, full and real and startled, the way laughter comes when it breaks through something you've been holding too tight. Don't wait until Sunday. What? Ask me now, on this porch, in my old dress, with bad harmonica music and no witnesses. Caleb looked at her. You want me to propose on a Wednesday with no ring? I want you to propose on the day you're ready. And if you talked to my father and the Reverend last week, you've been ready for 7 days. That's 6 days too many. He stood up. She stood up. They faced each other on the porch that he'd repaired and she'd swept, and they'd sat on together every night for 6 weeks, talking about cattle and numbers and suppliers and everything in the world except the one thing that mattered. Eleanor Whitaker. Caleb Mercer. I've got no ring. I've got no speech. I've got dust on my boots and cattle in my south pasture and a ranch that almost went under before your father fixed the books. I'm not a man who says pretty things. I'm a man who fixes porches and works cattle and goes to bed tired every night. Sounds about right, but I am asking you, not because Margaret left, or because Catherine left, or because your biscuits saved my crew from mutiny. I'm asking because 6 weeks ago, a woman walked into my kitchen with nothing but a mended dress and her own 2 hands, and she changed everything. Not by trying to, by being exactly who she was. Nora's eyes were burning. She would not cry again. She'd cried once, and that was enough for the year. she cried anyway. "Will you marry me, Nora?"
"Yes."
One word. No hesitation. No conditions. No negotiation about porch steps, or proper timing, or Wednesday versus Sunday. Just yes. Caleb reached for her hand. She gave it. His fingers closed around hers, rough against rough, callous against callous. Two people who'd worked hard enough to have hands that told the truth about their lives. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. They stood on the porch holding hands like two people who'd just agreed to jump off a cliff together and were taking one last breath before the fall. Maria's voice came from inside the kitchen. "Finally!" They both laughed, and the harmonica in the bunkhouse hit a note that was almost right, and the evening settled around them like a hand on a shoulder. And for one perfect moment, the entire ranch held its breath. The wedding was small. Reverend Whitfield officiated. Tom Booker stood as witness. Maria cooked enough food to feed 40 people, which was roughly what showed up. Ranch hands, neighboring families, the Hendersons from the feed store, the Clarks from the Eastern Range. Nora wore the dress Caleb had bought her. Blue. Simple. Good cotton with no patches and no mending and buttons that all matched. She'd resisted wearing it for weeks, saving it, rationing it the way she rationed everything good in her life. Maria had told her that morning, "Put the dress on, Nora. You're not saving it for a better day. This is the day." Henry Whitaker walked his daughter to the front of the ranch house, where the Reverend was waiting. He walked slowly. His bad arm hung at his side. His good hand held Nora's elbow, and his grip was so tight she could feel his pulse through his fingers. At the front, he stopped, looked at Caleb, looked at Nora. "Your mother would have liked him," Henry said. Quiet enough that only Nora heard. She squeezed his hand. He let go. The ceremony was 10 minutes long. The Reverend said his words. Caleb said his. Nora said hers. They were simple words, the kind that don't need decoration because the truth in them is already ornament enough. Caleb slid a ring on her finger. Plain gold, no stone. He'd had it made by the blacksmith in town because the jeweler's prices were robbery, and Nora would have killed him for spending money on a diamond when the ranch needed fence wire. She looked at the ring, looked at him. "It's perfect. It's plain. That's why it's perfect." They kissed. Once. Brief. The kind of kiss that's a beginning rather than a performance. The ranch hands cheered. Tom threw his hat. Maria wiped her eyes with her apron and denied it later. Henry sat in a chair by the porch railing. He didn't cheer. He didn't cry. He watched his daughter stand beside a man who treated her like an equal, and he breathed in a way he hadn't breathed in years. Deep. Full. The breath of a man whose chest wasn't being crushed by his own failure anymore. The first year was not easy. Nobody pretended it would be. Summer burned hard. The creek that had poisoned the calves was rerouted, but drought threatened the new water source. Caleb and Tom rode the property lines for 3 straight weeks, checking wells and springs. Nora managed the house, the kitchen, the garden she'd started behind the barn, and the increasingly complicated social obligations that came with being the wife of the territory's biggest rancher. She did it in her own way, not Margaret's way. When the Henderson family came for supper, Nora didn't set out the fancy china. She put out the same plates the hands ate from. Mrs. Henderson looked startled for about 3 seconds, then relaxed in a way she never had at Margaret's formal dinners. "This is nice," Mrs. Henderson said. "Feels like a real home." "It is a real home," Nora said. "We just eat in it." When the cattle buyers came from Denver, Nora didn't hide in the kitchen. She sat at the table with Caleb and Henry and discussed numbers. Because she'd been learning the books alongside her father, and she understood profit margins now the way she'd once understood bread ratios. Instinctively. Practically. The Denver buyer, a man named Greer, looked at Caleb after the meeting. "Your wife just negotiated a better price per head than I've given anyone in Wyoming." "I know," Caleb said. "You teach her that?" "Her mother taught her to stretch every dollar. I just gave her bigger dollars to stretch." Greer laughed. Caleb didn't, because he wasn't joking. In September, a letter came from Margaret. Nora found it on the study desk. She recognized the handwriting. Precise, controlled, elegant. She didn't open it. She brought it to Caleb. He read it standing by the window. His face went through changes she couldn't track. Surprise, then something soft, then something sad. "She's sorry," he said. "For what specifically?" "For Pratt. For the overcharges. She says she didn't know the details, but she should have. She put people in place and didn't watch them closely enough. She takes responsibility." "What else?" He folded the letter. "She says she met Catherine Price in Laramie last month. Catherine told her about that night in the kitchen, the dishes, what Catherine said to you." "And?" "Margaret says she spent her whole life trying to protect me from the wrong woman. She says she never considered that the wrong woman might have been the one she chose, not the one she tried to chase away." Nora was quiet for a moment. "That must have cost her something to write." "It cost her everything. Margaret Hale doesn't apologize. It's not in her constitution." "People change." "Do they?" "We did." Caleb looked at her, folded the letter into his pocket. "She wants to visit. Christmas. If we'll have her." "Write back. Tell her yes." "You sure?" "She's family, Caleb. Complicated family. The kind that drives you crazy and makes you question your sanity and shows up with lawyers uninvited. But family." "You're more forgiving than I am." "No, I'm more practical. I'd rather have Margaret at our table arguing with my father about numbers than Margaret in Cheyenne stewing alone. Alone is how she got dangerous in the first place." He almost smiled. "Your father and Margaret at the same dinner table. That ought to be something." "It'll be a bloodbath, but a polite one." And then October brought the news that changed everything again. Nora had been feeling wrong for 2 weeks. Not sick, exactly. Just off. Tired in a way that coffee couldn't fix. Queasy in the mornings. Hungry at strange hours. She'd ignored it because Whitakers didn't have time for feeling wrong. They had work. Maria noticed before Nora did. "When's the last time you bled?" Nora stopped chopping onions. Set down the knife. Did the math. Her face went white. 6 weeks, she whispered. Maria dried her hands on her apron. "I'll make you some tea. Sit down." "Maria, I can't. We're not. It's too soon. Sit down, child. Babies don't care about your schedule." Nora sat. Her hands went to her stomach without thinking. Flat. Unchanged. But something was in there. Something that had started on one of those quiet nights when the ranch was sleeping and the coyotes were singing, and two people who'd found each other against impossible odds did what people in love have always done. She told Caleb that evening, on the porch, their porch, the one with the repaired step and the fixed railing and the spot where he'd proposed on a Wednesday with no ring and bad harmonica music. "I'm pregnant." Caleb was mid-sip of coffee. He set the cup down very carefully, like it was made of glass, like everything in the world had suddenly become fragile and precious and terrifying. "You're sure?" "Maria's sure, and Maria's never been wrong about anything." He sat very still. Nora watched his face and saw something she'd never seen there before. Not happiness, not fear, but something in between. The expression of a man standing at the edge of a joy so big he's afraid to step into it because he knows how much it'll hurt if it gets taken away.
Caleb, breathe.
He breathed, one long, shaking exhale. I'm going to be a father. You're going to be a father. He turned to her. His eyes were wet. Caleb Mercer, who'd buried his parents, buried his brother, built a ranch from nothing, stared down cattle fever and crooked suppliers and Margaret Hale without flinching, had tears running down his face. He reached for her hand, held it, pressed it against his chest where his heart was hammering so hard she could feel it through his shirt. I don't know how to do this, he said. Neither do I. Your mother died when I was 14. She didn't get to teach me this part. My mother died when I was 20. Same. They looked at each other. Two people with dead mothers and broken histories, and absolutely no idea what they were doing, sitting on a porch in Wyoming with a baby coming and a ranch to run, and a life that had been impossible 8 months ago. We'll figure it out, Nora said. How? The same way we've figured out everything else, by doing it wrong until we do it right, by asking Maria, by reading whatever books we can find, by not pretending we know more than we do. He pressed her hand harder against his chest. I'm terrified. Good. Terrified means you care. She was quoting Maria. She didn't care. Some wisdom is worth repeating. Henry found out the next morning. Tom told him because Caleb told Tom, because Caleb couldn't keep it in for more than 12 hours, which was the longest Nora had ever seen a man try to hold a secret and fail. Henry came to the kitchen, stood in the doorway, looked at his daughter. Tom says you're expecting. Tom has a big mouth. Tom's right? Tom's right. Henry walked to the table, sat down, put both hands flat on the wood, the good one and the weak one, side by side. Your mother wanted grandchildren, he said. She talked about it, even before you were old enough to understand. She'd say, Henry, someday Nora's going to bring us grandbabies, and I'm going to spoil them rotten. His voice cracked. Just a hairline fracture, but Nora heard it. She'd have been proud of you, Nora. Prouder than I can say. Prouder than I deserve to feel, given how little I've done. Pa, that's not true. It is true. You carried this family. After your mother died, after my accident, after everything. You carried us. And now you're building something new, and He stopped, pressed his hands harder against the table. His shoulders were shaking. I just want to be here for it. That's all I'm asking God for. Just let me be here for it. Nora stood up, walked around the table, put her arms around her father from behind, careful of his bad shoulder, and held him while he cried. Maria stood at the stove. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to. Some moments don't need witnesses. They just need walls thin enough for love to leak through. The baby came in late spring. A girl, 7 pounds 4 ounces, loud, red-faced, angry at the world for pulling her out of the warm dark into the bright. Nora named her Ruth, after her mother. Caleb held his daughter for the first time with hands that could rope a steer and dig a post hole and build a coffin, and those hands trembled like leaves. She's so small, he said. She'll grow. What if I break her? You won't. How do you know? Because you hold everything that matters to you the same way, carefully, with both hands, like you know how rare it is. He looked at Nora. She was exhausted, sweat damp, hair loose. The strongest, most terrifying, most beautiful person he had ever known. Thank you, he said. For what? For coming. That first day. When Margaret sent you to be refused. For getting on that wagon and riding 6 hours in the heat to meet a man you'd never seen. For staying when you had every reason to leave. Nora reached out and touched the baby's hand. Ruth's tiny fingers closed around hers.
They sent me here to be shamed, Nora said. They picked the poorest girl they could find and threw her at the richest man in the territory, expecting her to bounce off and break. She looked at Caleb, at their daughter, at the kitchen she'd made hers, at the life she'd built from nothing but work and honesty and a stubbornness she'd inherited from both her parents. But I didn't break. I stayed. And staying was the bravest thing I ever did. On the porch that evening, Henry Whitaker held his granddaughter, while Maria stood beside him, pointing out which features came from which side of the family. "She's got Nora's jaw," Maria said. "That's trouble." "She's got her grandmother's hands," Henry said quietly. "Long fingers. Ruth had long fingers." Caleb sat on the step beside Nora. Their shoulders touched. The ranch hummed around them, cattle settling, hands laughing, the blacksmith's forge cooling with a tick and hiss. "Margaret wrote again," Caleb said. "She's coming for Christmas. She's bringing a gift for the baby." "Of course she is. It'll be the most expensive gift Ruth owns." "Probably. You mind?" "I mind if she brings a lawyer. Otherwise, she's welcome." He laughed, low, warm, the laugh of a man who'd finally stopped bracing for loss and started building for keeps. Nora leaned against his shoulder, closed her eyes, let herself rest, fully, completely, for what felt like the first time in her entire life. She thought about the girl who'd knelt barefoot in the dirt and held her father's shaking hands. The girl who'd ridden 6 hours on a freight wagon to meet a man who was supposed to refuse her. The girl who'd peeled potatoes and saved calves and stood in a kitchen while Margaret Hale told her she'd never belong. That girl was gone. Not lost. Grown. Grown into a woman who ran a kitchen, managed a household, sat at tables with cattle buyers, argued with her husband about fence lines, and held a newborn daughter named after a dead woman who'd never stopped believing her child would amount to something. Some wealth is counted in acres, some in gold, some in cattle or contracts or territorial connections. But the rarest wealth, the kind that can't be stolen or taxed or lost in a drought, is the kind that stands tall in dust, holds steady in storms, and answers every person who ever said, "You're not enough," with 2 words that echo louder than any fortune: "I stayed."